Hello everyone, Sandra here with more Let's Make a Game Astral Collision. And I have the stat builder up right now because this is the first thing that I really want to talk about. So there's been a bunch of things that I've gotten done over the interim. I was able to get through a lot of the playtest note things that I needed to change as well. But the kind of first big step was adjusting a bunch of things with this tool, where a bunch of things is more figuring out design stuff and algorithms than it is just like raw, I don't know how I want to phrase this, like raw work on it. So let's talk some about what I have done to this. Now, just to kind of make sure everybody's kind of caught up, one of the big things that I did was I did a big change to how I was calculating out all sorts of stuff with stats being based off of maximum HP, and then maximum HP growing on a sort of slow sloping exponential curve, which I can't demonstrate with my hand very well. It's an exponential curve. Starts off slow, gets steeper at the end, right? And just kind of calibrating that. Because I was running into issues where I couldn't really figure out power level of enemies, and I kind of feel with this most recent playtest that things are in a pretty good spot. So there's a couple of things that go into that. I will discuss them kind of in turn. But one of the things that I found with the playtest, not the one that I did most recently, which you'll find a link to in the description down below, but rather the one from the week prior, was that enemy damage seemed to be in a relatively good spot overall, but enemy durability was way low compared to what it needed to be. Enemies were just dying way too quickly. So there's a couple of things that go into that. First of all, the sort of way that I'd calibrated a lot of stats was off of a lot of assumptions. The base idea was that here's the amount of HP that you would have at this level or whatever. And the stats were calibrated such that it would be roughly 2 stats combined plus a little extra in order to get up to a 3-shot territory with attacks. And so, like, every attack was roughly going to be a 3-shot. That was kind of the rough area that I was aiming things for. Now, there are a couple of complications here. The first complication is that player stats were maybe not quite adhering to the same, like, sort of range of the formula. So, for example, you can see right here, we have 12 strength, 12 dexterity. Added together, that's 24. If I give myself 9 extra, that's going to start being a 3-shot, right? So we can see this. If I take my strength, my dexterity, I add them together, and I put 9 extra. Actually, I need 10 extra. That's putting me in 3-shot territory. Now, keep in mind, these are being rounded down to 12 instead of up to 13, so there's a little bit of wiggle room there. And if I kind of go up, you'll know that that goes up to 13 now, but this is still kind of staying, like, no matter where I go level-wise, not that, level-wise, like, it's going to fall off, but it's going to give you kind of a rough, like I said, it's going to slowly fall off, but that was kind of the rough idea. Now, some of the things that are complications with this is, like I said, player stats were maybe like 0.3, or I don't know, was it like 0.24 and 0.21 for strength and dexterity. As you can see, this substantially bumps it up into like 2-shot territory on the minimum damage here. And so that's an issue that I need to deal with. And it means that these stats are just higher than where they had been kind of like calculated to be at, right? That kind of gives you the rough gist of things. For example, I think Mishiso has like a 0.4 dexterity, just an absolutely ridiculous dexterity stat. So some of those like initial values are a little bit off, but the other thing that would happen is that we have 4 players. If 3 of them attack the same enemy, that enemy was calculated to be guaranteed dead. Nothing else going into it. Now, there could be things like vulnerabilities and weaknesses. That's one of the areas where this kind of starts to skew things. So if you take 3 hits to die, but you're being hit for something that's your weakness for 4 times damage, like say backstab. Backstab is a dagger attack. Now, daggers do about half the amount of damage they need to in order to be a 3-shot, but you're still like, it's your weakness. You're taking double damage from it, so you're taking basically 8 times damage from this attack. It would one-shot you and things like that. So, and again, like I said, if all things being ordinary, 3 of the player characters attack one enemy, that enemy's dying. That leaves a 4th player to like guarantee the kill or begin killing the next enemy. So enemies that were by themselves were dying way too easily. And important enemies in general could just die too easily because the players could all like, oh, we gang up on that person, they're dead. So I was very this system had problems. Let's just put it that way. So one of the things that I've done now is I've added some multipliers here. These are all multipliers, so if I put like a 3 here, you'll notice nothing changes over here, but over here is now 300 HP as opposed to 100 HP. These are also multipliers. I can put like a 1.5 here, and that will go up to 19 strength instead of, you'd expect it to be 18, but this is a rounding thing. This is actually like an eighth of that, which is 12.5. So it's getting boosted up to enough to kind of round up. It's, yeah, just how the rounding works. But this allows me to mimic the various items that players might have that would boost their stats. So, for example, you might have gloves that boost 2 of your stats like this. Whoops, not like that. 1.05, not 10.5. You know, this gives you a little bit of additional stats. And like if I'm at level 50, you can really, that adds up a little bit, right? So I added some stuff to be able to kind of mimic that behavior while still getting like this being the same, because players are going to be able to inflate their stats a bit. It's just, how it's supposed to work. And again, like I need a thing to boost HP as well without like, yeah, it just kind of gives you a realistic idea. This figure right here is actually calibrated towards what this range should be, not like, yeah. So I also have, let's just put like 2s in there. So I have a more complicated way of calculating maximum damage now as well, or the deadliness, right? Because I have this relative deadliness. This is currently considered an average threat. So I've got a couple of factors. Its HP is boosted up a bit because it has more HP. This goes up, if I have 12 HP, it's a 1.44, which is a pretty strong multiplier. Keep in mind, lots of things adjust the deadliness. Stat total gives a baseline that it works from, and that can have some wonky stuff going on with its formula based on rounding and other things with these stats. The damage also factors into it. So maximum HP is part of it. The more HP you have, the more of a threat you are. But like we've got a couple of things trending this down a little bit. So if my damage was a bit higher, like let's say I went 1.5 and 1.5 here, right? You can see that the damage goes up a bit. This moves this up a bit. If this was hitting 1.5 in deadliness, and I can nudge it up if I want to with this. So if I nudge it up to 1.5, it starts becoming some threat. HP, just raw durability, doesn't necessarily make you threatening. It's having enough stats as well, and having good damage, and having an effective crit. Like right now, this thing doesn't really have a critical. So if I bump that up to 125, suddenly the critical factor is a serious deal, and it gets nudged way up in terms of threateningness. Part of the reason why... Now, I think that the critical factor is a little bit overblown, but I'm okay with that because it helps compensate for not... Like, higher accuracy is going to weight... It's going to mean you're going to hit with more attacks, and it means that you're going to roll towards maximum damage more often, right? That's just how it works. So I kind of like the critical factor being a little bit overblown, just kind of account for that. But you can see this quickly becomes a high threat. Now, there's a couple of additional pieces of information going on here. It says damage max is high. What that means is that the damage maximum is above this range. That, it factors into stuff a little bit. Let's go ahead and sort of set this back down to 100, put us back into average threat territory. And let's go ahead and set this at 1.5 as well, which is kind of about where it should be for an average threat. So if we look at our damage factor, we've got a couple of different things going on. Now, I can bump this down a little bit, like if I put this at 1.5. Right now, the final damage factor is 1. If both your minimum and your maximum damage are within the 3-shot range, so here you can see it's 34 to 49 in this particular case, then you are going to have a damage factor of 1. If your minimum damage is below that range, then the minimum damage is low, which is going to reduce your threat level. There's also the average damage. So we've got 3 points basically that I'm looking at for this formula, just kind of give an idea of how I'm thinking through and processing this. We have the minimum damage, the maximum damage. This hand should be minimum, this hand should be maximum. And then we have the average, right, kind of in the middle. And, well, it is in the middle. It's precisely in the middle. So if minimum damage is below our 3 damage threshold, it trends damage down, but not a lot. It doesn't matter if the minimum's a bit low, if the maximum is a bit high. So like if I put this up to 2, where this takes damage max is high, damage min is low, then the final damage is not being affected by the average, because the average is within the 3-shot range. It is trending down a little bit just because this being low, this is more low than this is high, and there's some math there. So in general, the damage maximum being high, being above 3-shot, impacts the final damage factor less than it being below that territory. So if I were to drop this down to, say, 0, you'll notice that the final damage factor is now like 0.3. This thing's like a minimal threat, because this has pushed it down low enough in damage that this is now like a 4-shot, right? It's a 4 to 5 shot that this enemy is going to be able to deal. That makes it super low on the threat factor. And having high HP, like if I put 30 here, it's now just a low threat just because of how durable it is. But that's kind of like what's going on there. Now, on the other hand, if minimum damage is very high, right, then it's going to say that minimum damage is high, and it's going to start trending this up. Now, this is being pushed way down by that being low. You can see as soon as I put this into normal territory, see, it doesn't say that the maximum damage. Now, normally you wouldn't do this. You'd want minimum. The minimum damage is 46, and the maximum damage is 52. But in terms of like what the math is going on here, because I'm assuming you're not doing weird stuff, but I am for demonstration purposes. The minimum damage being above the 3-shot territory begins to really push it up a lot in terms of threateningness. So that's kind of how that works. Even if though this is in like reasonable territory, like let's put this back to like 1. Right, this is in reasonable range. If I push this up enough, that would really push it up to where now the average is high. That's going to push it up as well. Not as much as the minimum being above that threshold, but the average being above it does push it up. The maximum being high doesn't push it up anywhere near as much. So there's a bunch of like different things here where if like the average is high or low, outside of that 3-shot range, it really decreases or increases the threatening level. And the minimum damage being really high also dramatically increases the threatening level, but being low has a little bit of an impact, but not a ton. On the other hand, if the damage maximum goes above the sort of 3-shot threshold, it impacts it some, but not a ton. But if it goes below the minimum, then it really decreases its threat level quite a bit. So a lot of the threat level is going to be in how you calibrate the damage. The HP has a bit of a factor, and critical has also a bit of a factor as well. And you can also, like, if I put like a 2 here, that's going to push the total stat average variation up enough that it's going to also increase its threatening level. So there's a bunch of stuff that I did this to kind of try to calibrate enemies better. The threatening level like gives me some rough idea of how scary this enemy is. The big thing that it does is it changes the reward experience. So having something be a high threat, it's easiest to adjust it here. Some threat, average threat, low threat, minimal threat, and no threat. Like you can see that's 13 experience. This is also 13 experience. If I put this at like level 50, there would probably be a difference between them. let's see. Yeah, no threat is 523. They might actually fall into the same amount of experience. No, 23 to 54 to 616, 792. This jumps up a lot though. This like doubles the amount of experience that you'd get. This doubles it like again, and then this is just like, this is a ridiculous threat. This is boss level threat, right? And it gives you a lot of experience points. And then if we push it all the way up into nerf now, you can see it goes up to like ludicrous amounts of like, here's the expected reward that this should give. So all that the deadliness does is it gives me that rough idea of like, how scary is this enemy? How scary is it really? And a lot of that's based on damage, and then I can nudge it up if it has a lot of good skills or something. And it allows me to more effectively calibrate the reward experience, which is based on the idea of like, how many of this enemy do I expect you to have to kill to be able to get a level? So I do feel like experience rates are at a reasonable place as well. But there's a lot to talk about there because that was just a very important aspect of what happened. And that was kind of like a big foundational thing. I went through all of the enemies and I updated their stats in terms of HP. And got them, a bunch of them are a little bit more tanky now. Like, I think these guys are a little bit more tanky. These guys aren't really. These guys definitely are. These guys aren't really. These guys are way more tanky. Because a lot of things needed to be way more tanky than they were. A lot of enemies haven't been adjusted, but if you have, Chimera definitely is way more tanky. These guys are actually really scary. I fought a group of these on the playtest, and let's just say sleep powder is very strong. Having your entire party be put to sleep is not great to have happen to you. Fire imps, by the way, like they have less HP than a Chimera, right? Chimera has 2,343, and these guys are like, yeah, they are very threatening at like level 7. I haven't really been able to fight them properly at level 17, but you see I've added a level tag here. I'm not doing anything with it right now. But it's here. Fire imps, however, have substantially higher stats because these guys are level 60. Like, these guys are weak level 60s, but they're level 60s. So if you look at the Chimera, it's like it has way more HP, but it has like dramatically less of the stats, like a third of the stats, if that. So like, this is something that makes these guys really threatening if you're low level, but they're actually pretty weak if you were actually at level 60. These guys would be a pushover. So, and like enticers and ancient enticers are a lot more durable now. The enticer are actually a little bit less durable, I think. I shifted that down a little bit. Anything else to say about some of that? Like I said, I tweaked a bunch of those things. I should also add that the randomizer here will adjust the HP. So if I hit randomize stats, 149, 1.4, 1.53 on, like, this is just gets a bit of a range thrown into it. If I wanted a minimal threat, it'll give me lower HP. If I wanted a low threat, it gives me about 1 on the multiplier. Because we're at level 50, that's quite a lot of base HP that's working off of. Some threat starts having a 3 multiplier or around a 3 multiplier. High threat has around a 6 multiplier. And you can see, like, this is a ridiculous threat. Why is this a ridiculous threat? Well, it has higher HP. It has a higher stat total because I have a 2 times multiplier here. And its final damage is very high, right? Based off of, like, this being high. And so, like, this is making it ridiculous threat territory. You can see that this is just slightly over. I could nudge some of these a little bit and kind of get that exactly in range, but that doesn't really matter that much. And then if I go to boss, question mark, and I hit randomize stats, that gives me about a 12 times multiplier. Like, this one is nerfed now because it probably has enough strength and dexterity to push the damage up really high. This one is some threat because its strength and dexterity are not quite so high, which is what this is relying on. Or maybe it has lower fire and things like that. That kind of just the way that everything works out. But a lot of it's going to be this damage factor. So I added that as well, where it's like it calibrates the HP based on those things. I just remember that I'd done that and wanted to mention it. So there's something else too that I've done for threateningness. This right here, by the way, just because I have the cursor here, I'll talk about it real quickly. I adjusted these. These before did checks to make sure you couldn't use skills that restore HP or MP on allies that have maximum of those respectively. I removed the check for maximum because I wanted to be able to use skills like Cleanse to remove a condition from an ally that has full HP. So I did that adjustment. There's a lot of little code things that I'm going to kind of go through here. So let's just kind of scroll down a little bit. One of the things I did right here, just that way I'll kind of get to everything. We'll get to the threateningness towards the bottom. I adjusted this. This was just before, just 50 times this thing. I've now made it the subject at attack speed. So if you're getting low on MP and TP, then you're just going to be really slow. So yeah, this is something that I adjusted because I wanted a bit more variance in speed. And characters like the ninja have a really high base speed. So getting low on TP and MP with the ninja now will be a lot, like other things will be able to go before you. So there's going to be a lot more variance on some of that. So that was an adjustment that I'd made. Let's kind of scroll down here until I see the next thing that I did any real adjustments to. Yeah, we did that already. We talked about that. There's apply guard. We already talked about adding those. If you want to read any of these, you can pause and read them. That was equipment. Yeah, adjusting some of that stuff. Making drop items, clearing stuff out when you die. Drawing some parameter changes. I do need to go right here. This gain, I need to do a if HP is greater than 0, then do this. Actually, let's just do that right now. If this dot HP is greater than 0, then do this. Maybe don't revive dead allies. I'll talk about that more when I go over playtest notes, which I'm going to do in a bit. But I wanted to do that while I was thinking about it. And while I found it, and we're right here. So this should now make it so that way you only gain HP if you are not dead. That was kind of important. Okay, so a change that I made here, actually, yeah, right here on battle start. This was based off of your win stat, but your win stat's just going to increase over time. So instead of having starting TP based on your win stat, I'm now having it based on your TP charge rate, which makes a lot of sense, quite frankly. So you have a base 10 that you'll get, and then you'll gain an additional amount of TP based on 10 times your charge rate, which by default is 1. So by default, you'll gain 10 here. But if something's lowering your TP charge rate, excuse me, you'll get less. And if something's raising it, which is more often going to be the case, then you'll gain more TP. The idea here is that this rewards you for using stuff that increases your TP charge rate at the start of battle. And I wanted it to be something that was a bit more of a static feature that could be on equipment. As like I say in the comment here, I was thinking about doing some sort of meta tag. So like just some sort of tag on equipment or something like that in order to adjust it. But then I remembered that I had TP charge rate. So I figured, you know what, let's go ahead and use TP charge rate. And so far, I like that adjustment. It gives you some reliability, some ability to manipulate it. I think that's probably a reasonable place to put it. And that's going to be a bit more of a constant thing as well. I didn't do anything with any of this stuff here. Yeah, or any of these things, I don't think either. That's a lot of adjusting music. The whole thing for passing effectiveness on. I do need to adjust some of this. I have some ideas of things I'm going to be doing. One of the things that I ran into is having it say that was resisted when you cast a healing spell feels weird. So I kind of want to change some of the language here. Yeah, update placement. This was for doing the bestiary. Okay, so here's the next area where there's a lot of adjustment to things. So this right here is dealing with this is not actually changed. So this is basically a way that I'm doing to calculate out preemptive and surprise. So surprise is the enemy go first, preemptive is the player party go first. Basically, you get a free turn, as I say in the comment here on the line for the function. And one of the things that I wanted to do to make certain enemies more threatening, but also to make the player more powerful, is that I had previously wanted to do the thing where your stats would effectively triple the amount of damage that you're doing. So you're doing on average a 3-shot, triple the amount of damage every 5 levels, and then you'd be able to start to one-shot things once you have 5 levels above. And then I discovered that would require me to do an exponential that would leave the player party with like 200 billion health by the time that they were at maximum level. And I was like, this is ridiculous. I don't need to do that. And so I squashed it down to be 24 as opposed to every 24 levels as opposed to every 25, or as opposed to every 5, excuse me, which was a lot more reasonable in terms of the stats, but I was still running into that problem. Like, basically, this is the second part of the give enemies more HP so they're not getting instantly one-shot by backstab, to make enemies more threatening when they're higher level than the player. And so what this does is this does some math right here. I'll talk about it more in a moment on the spreadsheet. But what this basically does is this compares the sum of the stats of your strongest ally to the sum of the stats of the strongest enemy, and does some math to figure out preemptiveness. Now, this right here, this agility function now, instead of like looking at your agility stat or something, just looks at just finds the member of your party with the highest sum of stats. So if we go over to this document and go over to our math overview, I believe is down here. I was doing some, So calculating rates for surprise encounters and preemptive encounters. So what I was basically doing here was kind of looking at stats and things. This is player level. If I drop this to like 10, this might be a little bit friendlier. Thanks, got it. So what we have here is we have the enemy stats at level 1, I think. Yeah, the enemy stats at level 1. So if I did this, you'd see that jump up, right? And so we get this ratio PE. This is player over enemy. And what I did is I did some math to say, okay, if I take one of them over the other, subtract 1, and multiply by 4, which is what this... Was it this? No, what this does right here. This is take one thing divided by the other minus 1 times 4. This gives me a multiplier I can work with. So right here, this is 1. This is right here, you can see over here to the side, approximately 80%. And these are the levels down they are. This is 5 levels down, 4 levels down, 3 levels down, 2 levels down, and 1 level down. This is all extremely like approximate, right, in what we're dealing with here. But you can see that this gives me like the average stats that I expect you to have in total for the player at, level 10, and then the enemy at level 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9 is, and then at 10 as well, kind of work out to be, with this formula, sort of the rate for a surprise or in preemptive. So, to kind of back up a little bit, if the player has 5 levels over the enemy, then they should have stats that work out to this formula. Because again, enemies don't natively have a level. I could do something with the level thing that I added to them later, but I figured this out first, and I like this a little bit better because there's a little bit more wobbliness to it. So if you have 5 levels over, or effectively 5 levels over an enemy, but really, if your stats are sufficiently superior to an enemy's stats, based upon the way that this ratio works out, right? Which again, the ratio 1.5 here with like being 10 above. Like if I bump this enemy up to 5, for example, you'll see this ratio is 1.25, right? That's the ratio that I get. So if I subtract 1 from it, I get 0.25, 0.26, I guess you could round it to. And then if I multiply this by 4, I get basically 100%. So I have 5 levels on the enemy. Therefore, that gives me approximately 100% chance for a preemptive strike. If I have 4 levels, I get approximately an 80% chance. Approximately a 60% chance with 3 levels. With 2 levels, I get approximately 40. With 1 level, I get approximately 20. And with no levels, there's a 0% chance. And then we start working the other way. If the enemy has a level on me, then they have approximately a 20% chance to preemptive encounter me. and so on and so forth, going up to 100%. So that's what's going on here. There is some additional math going on with if you have cancel surprise, what it actually does is it halves this sort of the rate, which means that it takes longer to build up that ratio to be stronger. And here I multiply it if you have raised preemptive, which halves that range effectively. Now, again, this is all super, super approximate because it's based on stat ratios and stuff, and that can be variant. My first iteration of this actually found the average stat for your party and the enemy party, but then really weak enemies in a group would pull the group down, so I didn't like that, so I just went with the strongest. But this whole system, what it basically does is saying, if you are sufficiently stronger, approximately 5 levels worth of stronger than the enemy, then you get a free turn. And if the enemy is approximately 5 levels stronger than you, then they get a free turn. Otherwise, there's some math to determine the likelihood of free turns based upon how close you are to being 5 levels of strength above the enemy, or vice versa. And scaling down to where if you're approximately on even terms, then there's basically minimal chance that either of you will get a surprise or preemptive sort of thing going on. So this whole system was a way of making enemies able to be a lot more threatening if they are sufficiently stronger than you, because they get a free turn on you. But if you're sufficiently stronger than the enemies, then likewise you get a free turn on them, and that increases the threateningness of your team. So this was another system that I added in order to be able to kind of do a lot of this stuff. So yeah, that's a bunch of math. So I had that whole thing that I added, which was a pretty substantial thing. Right here, I've added a meta flag for items of can't buy if owned. We'll talk about what that's for in a moment, but basically it just says if this has the flag, and this right here just says, if this is not an item, then we don't try to check it, and it's just disabled. And if the price of this item is greater than your money, then you can't buy it. And then it says if the party doesn't have the item, then it can be enabled. Otherwise, it is disabled. And then I had to do some stuff with stop numbers to say you can't buy more than one if it has this flag on it as well. And then this right here just gets rid of drawing the colon for the quantity. So all of these combine with the ability to purchase these, which now has this description on it. I don't know why they're consumable, but you're never able to use them, so it doesn't matter. So that way, and I changed the icon for this as well, but you can see they have the can't buy if owned true flag. Now I can also do this for skill sets, I realized, as I was playtesting today. So I might have some skill sets that you're like, yeah, you can buy this skill set, but you can't, you can only buy one copy of it. But yeah, so this allows you to be able to buy information for the bestiary, but you can only buy one copy of it from them. And if you already own it from killing the enemy, you can't buy another copy. So that's what's going on with that, and that flag is very useful. Let's see. There's also a bunch of stuff in old playtesting notes. We'll go over the new stuff in just a moment. But I fixed darkening the journal's back pages so you can actually read things. I made it so that way NPCs that give information on enemies give you bestiary pages. It's not an also, it's just now they'll just sell you bestiary pages. I made it so that way guarding reduces the chance of being afflicted by conditions. So if I go over to states and I go over to guard, either the 2-turn guard or the 1-turn guard, they now have the chance that you'll be afflicted by condition. I'm just going to add a little tick mark in front of these if I've talked about them. Do I want this? I have decided that no. And tick mark. I nerfed Flame Swath. I added a magic crafter to the Caledon Guildhouse. So if we go up to Caledon, and we go into the Guildhouse, I've added the magic crafter. I originally didn't have the magic crafter, and then I added the magic crafter, so that's now done. I did reevaluate all plus damage and multipliers on stuff. I probably still need a bit more. The Iron Hill Guild House is now expanded to the left and added a magical crafter to that. So if we go back to Iron Hill, where I started, you'll notice that this is now one wider. It used to be 3, it's now 2, or it's now 4, excuse me, in width. And if we go into the Adventurers Guild House, there's now the magic crafter there as well. Yep, I already talked about this, allowing the healing of characters at full HP, so the cleansing can be done. This one I'm going to leave here. I still need to kind of like verify it with more parties. Reevaluate. I did this as well. So Hearty, I went through all of the food and adjusted things on it. Hearty Stew was giving you... I am in the enemy category. Hearty Hero Stew was giving you 108 base HP increase. I've adjusted it to be 25% maximum HP increase rather than 100%, or just straight 100 HP. It makes it scale better throughout the game and also makes it less absurd in the early game. So I did do that. And that's just adjusting the state. Make turning in bounties. Automatically set temp to your current bounties. Yes. So this is something that I did over here in Kandara in the Adventurers Guild House. Yes, Guild Floor 1. This NPC, by the way, just has a buying information on targets. I should probably add bounty values to those. Add bounty values to the description of Kendrin monsters. But this NPC right here now sets the variable that it stores the number of bounty slips you want to turn into to just be your current number of bounty slips, because that's usually what you want to do. You usually don't want to low roll it, and there's no reason to make you have to like cycle through. So you do get to choose how many you want to turn in if you want to turn in a specific number for some reason. But now it just defaults to taking all of them. That required a little bit more adjustment than I had realized it would. Let's see. Cave spiders. Yeah, I just adjusted the cave spider multiplier down. So as established, enemy like things were calibrated to do where 3 times, or where they would do a three shot. So they do damage equal to roughly a third of your HP on attacks, notwithstanding armor that would reduce it. And cave spiders had a multiplier of 3. I've reduced that to 1.5 now. If we go to enemies, cave spider right here, I've reduced their critical multiplier to 1.5. But when it was 3, they could just randomly one-shot you, which wasn't great. So I have adjusted that down. I fixed that. Plain scorpions, damage formula, like maybe it wasn't properly updated. Yeah, this was also the case. The plain scorpion is still very deadly with its 7 times critical here, but this was originally 4 times strength and dexterity, which was just ridiculous. It made it able to deal way too much damage. I have adjusted it so that way it is now 1.5 times both instead of 4 times both, which, as you can tell, is a substantially smaller number. I nerfed 1d4 of dark. I probably need to verify these, but I also nerfed that. That was done a little while back. This is the thing that I was just talking about with setting up preemptive strikes. Backstab, I made it cost a lot more. I decided I didn't need this super substitute flag for the Entice to protect the Enticers. They still have substitute flag, but realistically, giving them a lot more HP so that way they just don't like instantly die to a backstab from a level 4 character was kind of enough to kind of address that. Journal categories now show you what is in those categories. We will talk about that right now because why not? So the journal has a lot of complicated code going on. I don't necessarily want to go over all of the implementation details, but I basically had to set up a bunch of stuff with the journal list to be able to update its category and tell it to like update things connected to it potentially. So like right here, update, if it has an item window, then it will update stuff on its current item window, and I had to adjust some verbs for command names to fix some bugs. So rather than like talk too much about that code, because really wants to spend a bunch of time talking about the exact implementation details of the journal. If you are one of those people, you can let me know, and I will eventually be putting this on GitHub probably. But let's just go in here. This was the file that I was just playtesting on. I've added a separate bestiary, by the way, so we can look at our plain scorpions here in all of their glory, rather than having to go into the Adventurers Kit. I'm not entirely sure what I'm going to do with the Adventurers Kit. I'm also preparing for doing quests. But the Mystical Journal, now you can see, like, as I scroll across these, like, all of the categories there are appearing. And if I scroll through here, like, stuff that exists in those will show up in the list. I haven't added most things to this list, though. But they now show up there. And you can also see when I select this that now this is a nice opaque color, so you can actually read what's written here, rather than having it be transparent and impossible to read because of the other stuff underneath it. A lot of the journal stuff will need updating at some point, but I'm not going to update the journal's text really until things are like, I'm pretty confident that I won't need to change it. And that's on both a lore and a from a lore standpoint as well as a mechanical standpoint. So that's been done. Yeah, so I nerfed this focus. This focus was way too good. Plus 10, it was effectively plus 10 to all of your magical stats. It was the... Oh, I added this Crest of Sir Lionel, but there's no way to get it yet. As you can see, it's a souvenir ring bearing the Crest of Sir Lionel. It boosts your TP gain by 50%, but also target rate by 50%. Yeah, so you gain more TP, and enemies are more likely to attack you. But the Carved Oak focus right here, I've made it now, it just boosts your maximum MP by 36 instead of the usual 24, which might be very useful for some characters. What immediately comes to mind is Esgardul, who has a mechanic based on having more MP than the target. But it was originally like plus 8 to each of the 4 magical stats, and then an additional like 1%, which was kind of working out to be about like 10-ish, the way that it kind of seemed to function a lot of the time. But it was just such a raw increase in stats from it, because it was additive, right? Additive plus stats is extremely strong in this system early on and very weak late. And I don't mind a little bit of plus, but it was just such a huge boost of like effectively, I mean, at minimum plus 24 stats, and realistically like, plus 32. Minimum plus 32 stats. It was just had a huge friggin' impact, and it was just way, way too powerful. So I've nerfed that to do something else. Yep, blind now. Enemy durability I've done. Blind now also lowers your magical accuracy by the same amount. So if we look at our states, overall I did a few tweaks to some of these states. Blind now lowers your critical rate, not as much. Critical rate, remember, is spell accuracy. It lowers it some, not as much as it lowers physical accuracy, but it does lower it. There's a few other things. There's stuff that lowered your critical rate. So right here, Fear used to like completely kill your critical rate, which would have made your spells miss, because the idea is it made you too afraid to be able to hit critical hits. It now just lowers both of your accuracies a little bit. I buffed lightning reflexes to plus 75%. Absorption, I made this 20%. I'm thinking of trying to figure out some way of changing this to a different figure. I'm not entirely content with 10% of their HP. But I'm not quite sure what to make it just yet. Let's see. Windborne speed I gave a specific duration to, so it doesn't last indefinitely, and that feels like it's reined it in a good bit. Let's see, what else? I might need to adjust some other things. I went through the commendations, and I rebalanced their MP regeneration and TP. No, just their MP regen. Oh, this needs to... If Silver Commendation is raising your hit rate by that amount, it should raise your crit rate by that amount as well. Fixing things live, everyone. Intercepting, I ended up nerfing again. This was 10 times your strength. It's now 3 times your strength. It feels like it's in a good spot now. Very useful against the Enticed, not as useful against Chimeras. Stagger is still not something I'm really using. Good Luck from using a Clover now gives you critical rate as well for spellcasting. Yeah, this is attack state. I just need to make enemy stuff more able to do attack state things. I don't think there was anything that I really needed to adjust in any of these, but I did take a look at a lot of them. I still need to figure out what I'm doing exactly with the Sage, because a lot of these skills need to be modified, and like the conceit of it needs to be modified. Onions now boost your spell accuracy, and I have like updated text for it. Things like bread now appropriately give you more TP and less MP because these just are balanced differently. I think that's true of water gives you 1 MP regen instead of like whatever it was before. And berries gave you a bunch of MP regen. Now it's a little bit weaker. Yeah, apple pie is actually more useful now. Interesting. I think fruit salad is probably really powerful early on. I don't know. I'll have to play with it some, but it's the effect is inherently very powerful. And you can see that I've adjusted this to have the HP as I was mentioning. Okay. This one can be ticked off. So these are the playtest notes from today. So I wanted to change the icon for the mystical journal not be done to the quest log. I needed to assess if water would be better for the jacket from the mercantiles shop. Yeah, so I went through some of the armors and kind of cleaned some stuff up when I was doing this as well. I decided that the Royal Guard skills were in a reasonable spot in terms of like their base idea. And if I scroll up, I've updated the hunter's skills. We'll go over those in a moment. But yeah, so I went through and leader's plate mail, I gave a new inspiring shout skill because the previous one was a bit bonkers. And I turned this into be a Pyromancer's jacket because Kendra does not have the concept of ice damage. So I changed it to fire to match the idea that the person sold a Pyromancer's hat. But I need to actually figure out who can wear the jacket to figure out what would actually be useful. Healer's Robe also now gives you Healing Spring, by the way. I may want to change this to a different skill just to not overlap with the like healer's staff and stuff, but I might leave it as well. I think I'll leave it for now and see if I really want to change it later. But anyway, I made this boost fire because, like I said, the fire thing. Anyway, I want to actually figure out who wears jackets to see if those are characters that would be better served by having a water buff than a fire buff. Because like right now, Isa, for example, is a character that wears a jacket, and that character does not have a fire stat worth speaking about. So yeah, I just kind of went through stuff and like made sure I cleaned up a few like niggling bits here and there. So let's talk some about skills for other things. Actually, as I'm scrolling up, I did adjust the Druid. Exploding Vigor now does a specific random amount here of TP that it drains, because again, TP is a more static figure. And then it does damage, life damage, times the amount of TP that's actually lost. And the amount of TP that gets lost is based on your accuracy. I think I might lower this a little bit. It scales up a bit much. This starts at 4, and 15 times 4 is 60, which is a little bit on the high end. And then 30 is 120, which is definitely on the high end. So I think just right now, I'm going to just lower this to 10 to 20 on the accuracy. Although keep in mind that this does get affected by how much TP enemies have, so it does kind of cap a little bit in that regard. Second Wind is a wind-based healing spell that if the ally you're targeting with it has more than 80% of their maximum TP, they gain the Windborne speed stat. This is pretty good. I feel like it's in a pretty good spot. I'm not sure about the 80% TP or if it should just be if they have maximum TP. The advantage of 80% is there's a little bit of wiggle room, But the downside of it is you're not quite sure where that wiggle room is. So that's something I'm going to be keeping an eye on for feel. Obviously, the 80% is a stronger skill, but I don't think it's substantially different. And I think a lot of the time it's going to play like it was at maximum TP because that's when you know how much TP they have. Because it doesn't actually display the maximum, right? It just says, here's how much TP you have. So it's hard to know. I could potentially try to change the display in the game to give you exact TP, but otherwise you're just trying to guess based on how full the meter looks. So because for the most part it doesn't really matter, I might just change it to be maximum because I think it'll be an easier experience. Reckless Bash probably does need a bit of a nerf, but I'll look into that later because that's going to be a little bit more complicated to look at in terms of like decreasing damage and stuff. So yeah, if we, in a lot of these, I need to make sure I have normal attack on some of these things. But if we go down here, bandage wound, I adjusted down. It was a ×4 multiplier. I adjusted this down to ×2, and I need to figure out what I'm doing with this. That's one of my notes in here, actually, is... where is it, actually? It's in here somewhere. Yeah, adjust formula for... No, not that one. I do want to adjust Icy Breath, which is Isa's default spell, to rely more on how much percentage of TP Isa has, instead of front-loading a lot of the damage. I think that one needs to be adjusted. Yes, adjust TP part of Bandage Wound right here. So TP doesn't scale with HP the same way, so I feel like this part needs to be modified some, and I'm not quite sure how it needs to look. Consume Conditions, I want to change the skill entirely. It's ridiculous. Inspiring Shout now gives 30 TP and removes Rage, Fascination, Fear, and Sleep. It's very similar to... I don't know where it is in here. One of the Royal Guard skills, so it might be a little bit later, actually, now that I think about it. Okay, maybe not that later. Anyway, there's one of the Royal... Yeah, Encouragement. Encouragement removes Fear, Rage, gives TP, and recovers some HP. So these are very similar to each other. They both remove a couple of the states and gain TP for an MP cost. This one's a little bit more of an MP cost. Encouragement is... And the Encouragement's not as fast either. Encouragement is slightly cheaper. Doesn't give as much TP, though. It does have a bit of healing, but doesn't get rid of Fascination or Sleep. So I kind of feel like they're, on the surface, very similar. But at the same time, I feel like they're sufficiently different that I'm okay with keeping both of them, but that is something that I noticed. And then if we look at the attack skills, we have Harriers. Well, actually, the first one in this list is going to be... is it... No, not Skillful Strike. It was Careful Attack, and I feel like I changed the name because Careful Attack felt a bit wonky. I wanted something to kind of capture things a little bit better. Oh, Precise Strike. It's now Precise Strike, but it's the same basic thing. I think I increased the variance a little bit, so it's more likely to be a critical hit. It's more likely to be a critical hit, just because of the way that works. But this is a very useful skill. I think I increased the MP cost a bit as well, just because it's unmissing. That's kind of the main thing about it. This is an old skill that's been slightly modified and renamed. So this is one of the hunter's skills. This is where this is coming in, because we have the hunter's skills, the Kendron Hunter technically, but I don't think I call them Kendron Hunter because I don't need to. But if we look at Hunter skills right here, you'll see it gives Harrier Strike, Precise Strike, and Panicked Flailing. I liked Panic Flailing as a skill name for like, oh, you have this Precise Strike because you're a super good hunter, and you have this Harrier Strike because you're chasing down your target, because that's like you're harrying something, right? Harrier Strike. It's kind of like it's fleeing from you and you're chasing it down. And then you have Panicked Flailing because you got in way over your head. And you're panicking now. It just feels really appropriate, and like there's a lot of like just a little joking flavor in there, which I really enjoy. But anyway, this is a fairly high TP cost skill. It does not deal very much damage. It deals 1/5 of your dexterity. But what it really does, it does have a slightly better hit rate for whatever that's worth. But it decreases both TP and MP on the target by 30, which is really debilitating. And then if either one of those is 0, so it's completely drained, you can see right here, if either of them is 0, then it adds fear, and it fears the enemy, and then it does a little bit of plus damage. What this is really for is this is for debilitating enemies, and this is actually, I was using it on the most recent playtest. Again, link in the description below if you want to watch it. And it proved to be really useful against certain enemies for just like shutting down their special skills. So this is really, 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 really handy. And then there's Panicked Flailing, which is an attack all enemies skill. It has a chance to add fear because, like, you might get scared of the person wildly waving their weapon around. It has a very unpredictable amount of plus damage at 0 to 1.5 times your strength, right? It's very unpredictable. It also is very fast at 60, but it has 50% accuracy, so it's likely to miss if they have good evasion, and it's just not going to be able to hit as hard on the raw, like, weapon damage part, which means that this is quite unpredictable, but it does hit pretty well. I found that this was a skill that I was happy to use. It doesn't feel like this success percent chance is just like a multiplier on your accuracy, your physical accuracy stat. So you're not going to hit as hard, and good evasion enemies are going to be able to dodge this a little bit more reliably, but it still hits, and it still hits everything, which is really good for building up TP. So I feel like this is actually a pretty reasonable skill, and I'm pretty happy with where it's ended up currently anyway. So yes, I quite enjoyed that. Let's see, more going through playtest notes. Yeah, so here's this one. There's a bunch of random things. Like, I realized that I could combine the Kaladin Hunter. He sells you materials and information. Why not put them in one thing instead of two things? Damage info, I might want to change to reduce instead of resisted. Encouragement, this is my observation. That's very similar to Shout. I need to adjust the TP part of that. I want to change some icons here. Make it so that way dead party members don't resurrect. I think I did that on camera. Basically what happened was I was playing through and I'm like, wait, I'm able to just like power through this area that theoretically is kind of crushing me a little bit, just because like I'm able to scrape through the battles and then heal everybody after the battle, because a resurrection by the earth stat res thing was getting everybody back up who had died, and I'd run out of resurrection signets. I shouldn't just like be able to persist that hard, I feel. So for now, I'm actually just turning that off because I just felt that it wasn't working properly. It wasn't working in a way that I liked, and was invalidating the resurrection signet and the need for that. And like, it's one of those things where the number of resurrection signet charges you have should be a little bit of a backbone in terms of how far you can adventure into dangerous areas, and it was invalidating that. So I changed it so that way, yes, you still get healed. You saw me change it here on screen, but yeah, so I just felt like it was giving the player party a little bit too much legs, and allowing them to push into areas that were a bit too dangerous, more than they should realistically be able to do. Notes about how I want to adjust Icy Breath. I already mentioned that. I do want to adjust the formula for how much TP you get from taking damage. So one of the things that's in this game is when you're dealt damage, you gain TP from it. That's reasonable. There's actually something similar in Guild Wars 1 with adrenaline, where when you take damage, you get some adrenaline. But the problem that I was running into is that I feel like you get way too much TP from it, and this has some problems. So first of all, attacking enemies can fill up their TP, which can actually be beneficial for you if you're running with a druid, for example, in using explosive vigor. But just in general as well, I feel that it powers up the players a little bit too much when they get hit by stuff, and allows them to kind of like spam some of the TP skills, and I don't quite like that. I still think you should get TP from taking damage. I just don't think you should get as much TP as you get. And so I want to scale that down dramatically. So I'm going to have to look for that and kind of figure that out. I want to make so that way the random pickaxes you find in the Iron Hill mines the chests in the Iron Hill mines to be busted pickaxes. Perhaps you can repair them for a small fee, and you should be able to buy like new ones as well. But the ones that you just find lying on the ground should actually not be very good. Like, they were discarded because they were busted, and so they shouldn't be perfectly functional. And then, like I said, I want to make a perfectly functional pickaxe. Consume conditions is just over the top. Yeah, I want to make sure that doesn't... I'm okay with a skill that's like, hey, I shrug off conditions, and it's bad for you when that happens, but it's a bit over the top right now. And I also want it to be a bit more useful. What I'll probably do is I'll probably make it some sort of life drain skill that can trigger and can cause it to lose conditions. I'm not quite sure exactly what it's going to look like, but the way that it works right now is too strong. So I want to update something with crafting. This is something that I noticed when salvaging pickaxes, actually. It would say iron ingot times 8 is what you get from salvaging a pickaxe, but then when you actually go to the menu to choose how many you're salvaging, it would just say iron ingot and wouldn't actually give you sort of that information. When I changed confusion, and actually, let's just go ahead and fix this one right now. Let's go ahead and mark this one done, and with a tick mark, because I finished it in this thing. Let's just go ahead and go to these enemies. So something that I realized is I changed a water's state to be poison, and Earth state to be dazed when I removed confusion for dazed. So that way I could split silence up into paralysis and silence. And I did not properly update these enemies to reflect that. And I discovered that in battle, and I'm like, oh wait, that's not correct. So now that dazed is theoretically the Earth state, and poison is the water state. I needed to swap those to make them consistent. So that's been fixed. Poisonous Vine's animation is per target, not centered. Yeah, so what this would happen, what this would do is it just like, when the enemy is actually, you know what, I can, if I go up to troops, I can probably get this to happen by doing a battle test with these guys. Yeah, I don't care. Let's just go. I'll just guard until they do it. This is pretty ridiculous. You'll see what I mean by this. Sit. Yes. Okay. Just gonna need to guard some more, apparently. You do recover MP when you guard. And a bit of HP. Yeah. Behold, that's what Poisonous Vines does. I have now demonstrated it. That's why I want to change it. So we're going to go to animations, and we're going to go find bind. Whoops, that's not how you spell bind at all. So it's this animation right here. Right? Its position is currently feet. I want it to be center. So I might need to adjust this some. We'll see. We can actually check right now if I really want to. So you know what? Yeah, let's just go. That 1 HP is a bit silly. What is that set to? Is that... Oh, I bet that's 1% HP. Yeah, that's probably what's going on there, is that's probably just 1% HP. So let's see how this looks. Like I said, I might need to adjust it when it's not aimed at the feet now. Oh, goodness. I thought that would... Okay, what did I miss? Oh, I need it screen, not center. That was... Yep, that was what I missed. This is why we test stuff, right? I don't necessarily want this thing to go super long. Well, I'll give another round of it just to see if that, like, positioned it, like, okay. If it did, cool. If it didn't, I'll adjust it later after the recording. You also gain a bunch of TP when you guard. but it doesn't tell you about that. I should probably adjust how much it gives you, too. Yeah, that seems fine. I'll probably tweak it a little bit to try to move it down a bit further. But I think that's better. It's not as absolutely chaotic. So I'm going to just go ahead and mark this as done as well. I was wondering if Flame Swath should be a physical attack instead of a spell. I don't think I'm going to do this. But the reason why I was thinking about this is... I'll explain both angles. So Flame Swath is one of the hero's skills, the War Mage's skill right here, Flame Swath. So it is skill type... I do want this to be skill type physical, because it's a magical attack. But its hit type is magic. And what this means is that it checks against magical... It cares about your magical accuracy, your basically your crit rate. So if you have a really good physical attack rate, this is not actually going to care about that. It just cares about what your spell rate is. So if your spell rate is low, like I've had on this character, because say you're wielding a physical weapon that doesn't give you a lot of additional spell stuff, then it's going to be less powerful. It's going to be more likely to be evaded and all these sorts of things. This does create some tension, though, that I'm kind of okay with. I want this to be special as well. Basically, I want this to be falling under the physical attack category, but the magical attack accuracy hit type thing when it's a magical attack like this. I'll probably want to make sure I have... I don't know. It doesn't matter. I'll worry about it later for other things. But the basics here is that I wasn't sure if I wanted that particular tension existing or not. Because what ends up happening is there's a pretty good chance that it will kind of I don't know. Basically I've decided I like the way that it kind of ends up playing out. But the healing off of the Scythe critical hits was too strong. That's something I need to adjust. I also want to see if I can make it so that way skills that are tagged with use as weapon will show the weapon just like when you use attack. So there's basically these weapon animations that are in the game that if you use just attack, it will play the animation, but if you use any skills whatsoever other than attack, it doesn't show the animation. And so when I have things that are like, this is attacking with a weapon, but it doesn't show the weapon because it's a skill that does weapon damage plus. Anyway, I have this tag for use as weapon, and I kind of want to see if I can make it so that way it will show the weapon because it's an attack skill. Yeah, this is another thing that I was talking about. Make sure that monster attack skills have normal state on them so that way they can apply them. And then I added this here on the thing. So that kind of goes through all of that. I feel like there's probably another thing or two. I switched some stuff around a little bit. I made Icy Breath cost more MP. MP costs in general, I'm suspecting, are something that I'm going to want to kind of increase a bit across the board. Yeah, see, this is a special and a physical attack. I don't know if they'll probably keep being physical attacks, but they may get adjusted to be magical attacks. I feel like this is probably long enough. I've gone over a lot of things here. I have started thinking about how I'm going to... let's go to common events. So I've started thinking about how I'm going to put together the quest log using hidden item B in order to kind of do quest logs similar to the way that I'm doing the bestiary. And I need to figure out what I'm doing with the adventures kit because I took the bestiary out of it because it was annoying to have to go into an additional menu or an additional dialogue in order to be able to select it. And I just kind of want to simplify the adventures kit a bit. More accurately, I wanted to make the bestiary easier to access, and I wanted it available right away. So, yeah. Do I have anything else? There's lots of different things that I'm kind of thinking about in terms of healing, access to free healing stuff. Like Kazdan the healer. Should he be free healing? I don't know. Maybe he should be 15 gold or something like that for healing rather than handing out for free. But yeah, I'm preparing stuff for the quest log. Getting together a quest log is kind of my next major priority that I want to accomplish. and starting to get more areas put together, getting NPCs put in. But one of the things that I'm wanting to make sure I do is kind of figure out what all of my base core systems are going to look like, and then get stuff set up so that way those systems are able to like be in a good enough place for adding more content using them. So that way, if I find I don't like how they're working, I don't have to go back and change like 30 times what I've already implemented worth of stuff because I've decided the underlying system needs to be different. So I'm really happy to have this in a place where I feel like it's actually pretty solid now, for example. Yeah, I haven't really done a whole lot with maps. I do want to change the starting area. The Forgotten Tomb, or more accurately, the Ancient Catacombs. I don't really like the way that this is laid out. I find it tedious to get through. And I want to put more like thought into what I'm doing with it and adjust it around a bit. So that'll be coming at some point. And I want to just start filling out these. I did add a resurrection statue thingy over here to Sandy March because I got tired of having to walk back up to it when I died to skeletons. So I think that's going to cover everything. I'm sure that there's some little details that I'm forgetting, but I feel like I've covered most of it, and going over the playtest notes really helps with doing that. So, yeah, right here. Reconfigure the starting area to be better and less tedious to get through. Absolutely that. Yeah. So that's going to be it for this particular video. And like I said, the playtest is in the description below if you want to view that. There is a section of it, unfortunately, where I had like clicked off of showing the game because I was demonstrating something else and I forgot to put the game back on as soon as I should have, but these things happen sometimes. So yeah, until next time, everyone, thank you for watching. Take care and goodbye.